The decision to move to Oakwood Estates came after years of high-stress postings and global uncertainty. After a decade and a half as a national security advisor working directly with top government officials, I wanted something different for Emily and myself. A quiet neighborhood with good schools, wide sidewalks, and most importantly, distance from the constant pressure of Washington. The kind of place where a single father and his daughter could find some peace. Emily was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at age 4. The progressive condition affected her muscle movement and strength, eventually confining her to a wheelchair by the time she turned 9. But her disability never dimmed her spirit. Her mind remained sharp, her smile infectious, and her determination unwavering. She was my North Star through the darkest times, including when her mother left us, unable to handle the challenges of raising a child with special needs. The first few weeks in Oakwood Estates seemed promising. Neighbors brought welcome baskets and introduced themselves warmly. Mr. Peterson across the street helped us install a small garden that Emily could tend from her wheelchair. The Thompsons next door invited us for dinner. It felt like we had found our sanctuary at last. I modified our home to accommodate Emily's needs, widening doorways, installing ramps, creating accessible bathroom fixtures. All of these changes were within our property and, according to my research, protected under accessibility laws. The modifications were discreet and maintained the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood, or so I thought. The first HOA meeting I attended introduced me to Karen Winters. She sat at the head of the conference table in the community center, her platinum blonde hair perfectly coiffed, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her voice carried the artificial sweetness of someone accustomed to getting her way through a veneer of politeness. "We have several new homeowners with us tonight," she announced, her eyes landing on me. "We welcome you to our community and remind everyone that all exterior modifications must be approved by the board." Her gaze lingered on me a moment too long, her smile never reaching her eyes. After the meeting, she approached me with a clipboard clutched against her chest. "Mr. Mitchell, I noticed the ramp you installed at your front entrance. I do not recall seeing an approval form for that modification." I explained patiently about Emily's condition and the accessibility requirements. Karen nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, we have standards here. You will need to submit proper paperwork. Our community aesthetic is important for property values." At the neighborhood barbecue the following weekend, I watched Karen observing Emily from across the lawn. My daughter was showing some neighborhood kids how her specialized wheelchair worked, their faces full of curiosity rather than pity. Karen whispered something to another board member, both of them glancing our way. The first official violation notice arrived 3 days later, unapproved modification to front entrance. Then another, improper garden bed height, and another, non-standard mailbox placement. Each notice was trivial, but the pattern was clear. What had seemed like a peaceful neighborhood was revealing its true nature, a kingdom of petty rules presided over by a queen who viewed difference as defiance. The facade of our peaceful new beginning was cracking, and through those cracks I could see the conflict brewing. But I had navigated hostile territories before. I just never expected to find one in suburban America, or that my daughter would become the target of its ruler. The manila envelopes kept coming, each bearing the HOA letterhead and the unmistakable signature of Karen Winters. 2 weeks into our new life, I had accumulated a stack of violation notices that seemed specifically designed to target every accommodation I had made for Emily. "The gradient of your front ramp exceeds our aesthetic guidelines. Garden beds must maintain a uniform height of no more than 24 inches. Widened doorways require special approval with architectural plans." Each evening after Emily went to bed, I would sit at my desk with a dual reality. On one screen, encrypted national security briefings requiring my analysis. On the other, HOA bylaws and the Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines. The irony was not lost on me. I had advised on international treaties, helped navigate complex diplomatic crises, yet here I was, battling over the width of a doorway. I documented every interaction with Karen meticulously. My training had taught me that information was power, and documentation was the foundation of any successful strategy. I photographed our modifications, compiled regulatory codes supporting our case, and prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The monthly HOA meeting arrived, the commune. ID Center conference room was half filled with residents, many looking bored or checking their phones. Karen sat at the head table, arranging papers with rehearsed authority. Item 7 on our agenda, Karen announced, property violations requiring board attention. She looked directly at me. Mr. Mitchell, your property has accumulated several citations that require immediate remedy. I stood, briefcase in hand. I would like to address those citations, if I may. My voice carried the calm authority I had used in Pentagon briefings. I approached the table and opened my briefcase, extracting a carefully prepared folder. The modifications to my home are protected under the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, I explained, distributing copies of relevant legal codes to board members. My daughter requires these accommodations for her disability. Federal law supersedes HOA regulations in these matters. The room fell silent as board members reviewed the papers. Karen's face flushed crimson. "This is not about your daughter's condition," she said, her voice sharp. "This is about community standards that everyone must follow." "The law disagrees," I replied evenly. "These accommodations are reasonable and necessary. Denying them could constitute discrimination." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I could see the division forming, those who recognized the legal reality versus those loyal to Karen. "We will take your documentation under advisement," Karen finally said, her voice clipped. "But until a decision is made, you are still in violation." Walking home with Emily after the meeting, I noticed her unusually quiet demeanor. "What is wrong, Emily?" I asked, concerned by her silence. "Mrs. Winters told Jessica's mom that I get special treatment," she said softly. "Now Jessica did not invite me to her birthday party." My heart sank. Karen had escalated beyond property disputes. She was socially isolating my daughter. The next day I applied for a permit to install a small lift next to our back deck, a necessity for Emily to access the backyard independently. Within hours, Karen appeared at our door. "That lift application has been denied," she declared, taking obvious satisfaction in delivering the news personally. "On what grounds?" I asked, keeping my tone professional despite the anger building inside me. "Aesthetic impact. It would be visible from the street through the side yard," she smiled thinly. "Perhaps you should have considered these issues before purchasing in a community with standards." As she turned to leave, I noticed Emily watching from the hallway, her face fallen. Something inside me hardened. My professional life had taught me to identify threats and neutralize them systematically. For the first time, I began to view this suburban conflict through that same analytical lens. The following week, several neighbors quietly approached me. The Hendersons admitted they had wanted to install a therapeutic hot tub for their arthritis, but abandoned the idea after Karen's harassment. The Patels described how their request to build a small religious shrine in their backyard had been repeatedly denied without explanation. "She has run this place like her personal kingdom for years," Mr. Henderson confided. "Most of us have just learned to keep our heads down." I nodded, taking mental notes. My security training had taught me that understanding the full scope of a threat was crucial to addressing it effectively. Karen had not just targeted us, she had established a pattern of control that affected the entire community. That evening, as I helped Emily into bed, she looked up at me with her wise eyes. "Dad, why does Mrs. Winters hate us so much?" "She does not hate us, sweetheart," I replied, smoothing her hair. "She fears what she cannot control, and unfortunately that is us." What had begun as neighborhood tension was evolving into something more fundamental, a contest between compassion and control, between inclusion and uniformity. And I was starting to realize that this conflict would not be resolved through conventional channels. Little did I know just how far it would escalate or how dramatically it would end. The annual Oakwood Estates summer barbecue arrived on a perfect June afternoon. Blue skies, gentle breeze, the scent of grilling meat filling the air. Emily was excited to attend, wearing her favorite yellow sundress and a flower clip in her hair. I had spent the morning ensuring her portable ramp would allow her access to the community center grounds where tables and games were set up. "Do you think Jessica will talk to me today?" Emily asked as I wheeled her toward the gathering. "I hope so, sweetheart," I answered honestly, "but if not, we will still have a good time together." The event was well attended. Neighbors milled about, children played games on the lawn, and volunteers managed the grill stations. I noticed Steve. RAL residents greeting Emily warmly, perhaps in quiet defiance of the social isolation Karen had attempted to create. We had been there about an hour when I set up the portable aluminum ramp so Emily could access the slightly elevated patio where the dessert table was located. The ramp was discreet, temporary, and necessary for Emily to participate fully in the community event. I was speaking with Dr. Ramirez about his son's college applications when I heard Karen's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the ambient chatter. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I turned to see Karen standing over Emily, pointing at our portable ramp with unconcealed disdain. Her face was flushed, perhaps from the heat or the 2 glasses of wine I had observed her consuming. "Excuse me," I said to Dr. Ramirez, moving quickly to join my daughter. "This ramp was not approved for today's event," Karen declared loudly, drawing attention from nearby guests. "You cannot just install structures wherever you please." "It is a temporary ramp so my daughter can access the dessert table," I explained calmly, conscious of the growing audience. "We will remove it as soon as she is finished." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules. This is precisely the problem with you, Mr. Mitchell. You believe you are entitled to special treatment." Emily, always attempting to be the peacemaker despite her young age, spoke up. "I am sorry if the ramp is a problem, Mrs. Winters. I just wanted to get a cookie like everyone else." Something in Karen's expression darkened as she looked down at my daughter. "This is not about cookies. This is about your father thinking the rules do not apply to him. These eyesores are dragging down our property values." Several neighbors had gathered now. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward. "Karen, it is just a small ramp. The child needs it to participate." "Stay out of this, Susan," Karen snapped. "You have no idea the precedent this sets. Next thing you know, we will have all manner of ramps and contraptions ruining our community aesthetic." Mr. Peterson joined in. "Come on, Karen, be reasonable. The girl just wants to enjoy the party like everyone else." I could see Karen register that she was losing public support. Her face contorted with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "This is exactly what I mean," she hissed. "He comes in here with his disabled daughter, and suddenly everyone forgets the standards we have worked so hard to maintain." The collective intake of breath from the neighbors signaled that Karen had crossed a line. Emily's face fell, her eyes filling with tears at being discussed as a problem rather than a person. "Please apologize to my daughter," I said, my voice low but firm. "For what? Telling the truth?" Karen looked around at the shocked faces. "Oh, stop it, all of you, we are all thinking it. These accommodations are eyesores. Special treatment is not fair to the rest of us who follow the rules." Emily wheeled herself forward, her small hand extending toward Karen in a gesture of reconciliation that showed maturity beyond her years. "Mrs. Winters, I do not want to cause problems. I just want to be included." What happened next occurred in a horrifying sequence that seemed to unfold in slow motion. Karen took a step back as if Emily's outstretched hand was offensive. In doing so, she bumped the edge of the portable ramp, causing it to shift. Emily's wheelchair tilted precariously. I lunged forward but was too far away to prevent what followed. Emily slipped from her chair, landing awkwardly on the patio. As she attempted to push herself up, Karen, whether from intoxication, rage, or simple malice, took a step forward and kicked my daughter in the stomach. "Get away from me," Karen shouted, as if she were the one being assaulted. The sound that escaped Emily's lips was not a scream but a whimper, a soft, pained gasp that tore through me like nothing I had experienced in my life. The neighbors erupted in shocked exclamations. Someone shouted for Karen to back away. I reached Emily in 3 strides, kneeling beside her crumpled form. Her face was contorted in pain, tears streaming down her cheeks. Years of crisis management training, of maintaining composure in the face of international threats, barely contained the fury surging through my body. "Dad," Emily whispered through her tears, "it hurts." "Someone call 911, I commanded, my voice deadly calm. I gathered Emily gently in my arms, checking her for injuries. Her stomach would likely bruise, but I needed to ensure there were no internal injuries. Karen stood frozen, perhaps realizing too late the line she had crossed. Her face cycled through emotions, anger, shock, and finally, a flicker of fear as she registered the expressions of disgust on the faces surrounding her. She fell into me, Karen attempted, her voice lacking conviction. I was just trying to create distance. We all saw what happened, Mr. Peterson stat. Ed firmly, you kicked a disabled child, a child in pain on the ground. Mrs. Thompson was already on the phone with emergency services. Other neighbors had formed a protective circle around Emily and me. I looked up at Karen, meeting her eyes with a gaze that had made foreign dignitaries and hardened intelligence operatives uncomfortable. You have made the biggest mistake of your life, I said, my voice barely audible but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. For 15 years, I had analyzed threats to national security, calculating risks and appropriate responses. Never had I imagined applying those skills in defense of my own child, against a threat wearing capri pants and clutching an HOA clipboard. But in that moment, cradling my whimpering daughter, I made a silent vow. Karen Winters had no idea who she had just challenged, and she would soon discover the difference between petty power and real consequences. The emergency room physician gently examined Emily's abdomen, his face professionally neutral. There is significant bruising, but no signs of internal bleeding or organ damage, he concluded. We will run a few more tests to be certain. I nodded, holding Emily's hand. She had been brave throughout the examination, though the pain medication had made her drowsy. Document everything, I instructed the doctor calmly. I want detailed medical records of all injuries, including photographs. The doctor raised an eyebrow at my methodical approach but nodded. Of course, the police will want those for their report as well. Officer Daniels arrived while Emily was undergoing an ultrasound. He took out his notepad, pen poised. Can you tell me what happened today, Mr. Mitchell? I provided a detailed account, times, locations, exact words spoken, and a precise description of the physical assault. The officer looked increasingly surprised at the level of detail in my statement. You have quite a memory for specifics, he remarked. Professional habit, I replied simply. There were also at least 15 witnesses. I can provide you with names and contact information for each one. When Emily was cleared to go home with instructions for rest and monitoring, I carried her to the car. Her small body felt fragile in my arms, triggering a renewed surge of controlled anger. The incident replayed in my mind, not with emotion, but with analytical precision. Karen's actions represented not just a personal attack, but a calculated abuse of power that had finally crossed into physical violence. Over the next 3 days, I took leave from work. While Emily rested, I converted our home office into what would have looked familiar to my colleagues at the Pentagon, a strategic operations center. On one wall, I created a timeline of all interactions with Karen and the HOA. On another, I pinned the growing collection of violation notices. My laptop contained folders of meticulously organized documentation. I made 3 key phone calls. The first was to Marcus Jennings, an attorney specializing in disability rights law who had worked with government agencies. The second was to Sarah Chen, a forensic accountant who owed me a favor from a previous security clearance issue. The third was to my colleague at the National Security Council, requesting specific information through channels I rarely used for personal matters. Tell me about Karen Winters, I asked my colleague over our secure line. Interesting request, he replied. Any particular reason? She assaulted my daughter. I need to understand who I am dealing with. The information arrived within hours. Karen Winters, née Peterson, age 49, 2 previous divorces, no criminal record but a history of civil disputes with former neighbors, employers, and service providers. Financial difficulties following her second divorce had preceded her move to Oakwood Estates 8 years ago. She had been HOA president for 7 years. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen called with interesting findings from her analysis of the publicly available HOA financial records. There are irregularities, she noted. Nothing definitively illegal from what I can access, but enough smoke to warrant looking for fire. The next evening, our doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, carrying a casserole and a concerned expression. How is Emily doing? She asked. Recovering, I replied. Please come in. In our living room, Mrs. Thompson's concern transformed into determination. Several of us have been talking. What happened to Emily was horrifying, but not entirely surprising. Karen has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Tell me more, I said, offering her coffee. Over the next hour, Mrs. Thompson shared stories. The elderly couple who moved away after Karen harassed them about their medical equipment visible through windows. The young family who received daily violations for children's toys visible in their yard. The Vietnamese family who were cited for cooking odors that Karen claimed affected property values. Why has no one challenged her? I asked. Fear, Mrs. Thompson replied simply. She has connections with local realtors. People worry about selling their homes if they cross her, and most of us do not have the knowledge to fight back legally. I nodded, understanding the dynamics of intimidation. Would others be willing to share their experiences? After what happened to Emily, yes, I believe they would. That night, after checking on my sleeping daughter, I stood at my office window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. My professional training had taught me to identify patterns, assess vulnerabilities, and develop strategic responses to threats. For the first time, I was applying those skills in defense of my child, and by extension, an entire community. Emily stirred and called for me. I went to her room, sitting gently on the edge of her bed. "What are you doing, Dad?" she asked sleepily, noticing my preoccupied expression. "Teaching someone that actions have consequences," I replied softly, brushing hair from her forehead. "Are you going to hurt Mrs. Winters?" she asked, her eyes concerned. "No, sweetheart, I am going to do something much more effective. I am going to expose the truth." For 15 years, I had protected national interests through careful analysis and strategic planning. Now, those same skills would serve a more immediate purpose. Karen had built her kingdom on intimidation and manipulation. My response would not be emotional but methodical, not revenge but justice. The operation to dismantle Karen's power had begun. Dark clouds gathered over Oakwood Estates, both literally and figuratively, as an emergency HOA board meeting was called to address recent community disturbances. Rain lashed against the windows of the community center as residents filed in, the atmosphere charged with tension and whispered conversations. I arrived early, setting up my materials with precise care, folders for each board member, a laptop connected to the projector, and a small recording device placed discreetly on the table. Emily was at home with Mrs. Thompson, still recovering from her injuries but improving daily. Karen entered the room with practiced confidence, her hair perfectly styled despite the rain. She nodded to her allies on the board, ignoring the cold stares from other community members. If she felt any remorse for her actions at the barbecue, her expression betrayed none. "This meeting will come to order," announced Gerald Fisher, the board vice president. "In light of recent events, we need to discuss community leadership and incident response protocols." Karen immediately took control. "I understand emotions are running high," she began, her voice smooth and reasonable. "However, what happened at the community barbecue has been greatly exaggerated. The Mitchell girl was not following proper safety protocols with her equipment. When she fell, I simply tried to create distance for safety reasons. My actions have been mischaracterized." I observed the room carefully. Some board members nodded along with Karen's version of events, while others looked uncomfortable. The gathering storm was not just in the weather outside, but in the divided loyalties within this room. "Before we continue," I interjected calmly, "I would like to distribute some materials relevant to our discussion." I handed out folders to each board member. These contain witness statements from 15 community members who observed the incident, medical documentation of my daughter's injuries, and the police report filed immediately afterward. Karen's face flushed as board members opened their folders. "This is not the proper procedure for." "I believe accountability is always proper procedure," I interrupted, my voice quiet but carrying, "especially when it involves the assault of a disabled child." The room fell silent as board members reviewed the statements. Gerald Fisher cleared his throat. "These accounts are very disturbing, and they directly contradict your version of events, Karen." "People see what they want to see," Karen replied dismissively. This is clearly an orchestrated attempt by Mr. Mitchell to divert attention from his continuing violations of community standards. Which brings me to the second matter I would like to address, I said, connecting my laptop to the projector: community standards and how they have been selectively enforced. The screen illuminated with a detailed spreadsheet analyzing 7 years of HOA violations and enforcement actions. This analysis shows a disturbing pattern of targeted enforcement against specific homeowners, primarily those who have questioned board decisions or who belong to minority groups. Karen stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. You have no authority to access those records." "All HOA records are legally available to homeowners upon request," I replied, "and public records are just that." Lick. I advanced to the next slide, displaying financial records. More concerning are these financial discrepancies in HOA accounts over the past 3 years. The board members leaned forward as I highlighted several transactions. These expenses, coded as landscaping maintenance, correlate exactly with dates of Karen's personal vacation to Bermuda last year. These office supplies match receipts from luxury retailers, and these professional services cannot be traced to any vendor actually serving our community. The room erupted in confused conversation. Karen's face transformed from indignation to shock, then to fury as she realized the depth of my investigation. "This is slander," she shouted over the noise. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing." "Actually," I replied, sliding a USB drive across the table to Gerald Fisher, "this contains complete documentation, including bank records, travel confirmations, and retail receipts. I believe the board has sufficient cause to conduct a full audit." Karen's eyes narrowed as she looked at me with undisguised hatred. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she hissed, low enough that only I could hear. "I have friends in this county who can make your life very difficult. By the time I am done with you, your precious security clearance will be revoked." The irony of her threat hung in the air between us. I leaned forward slightly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Neither did you when you decided to hurt my daughter." Lightning flashed outside, throwing dramatic shadows across the room as board members continued examining the evidence I had provided. The storm had broken, both outside and within the community center. Years of Karen's unchecked power were facing their first real challenge. Gerald Fisher called for order. "In light of these serious allegations, I move that we temporarily suspend Karen from her position as board president, pending a full investigation of both the assault incident and these financial irregularities." The vote was 7-3 in favor of suspension. Karen stood rigidly as the decision was announced, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. "This is not over," she declared, gathering her belongings. "You will regret this witch hunt." As she stormed out into the rain, several board members approached me with questions about the documentation I had provided. I answered each one methodically, explaining the evidence without emotion or embellishment. This was not about revenge, but about systematic dismantling of abuse. Later that evening, as I drove home through the rain, I reflected on the day's events. In my professional life, I had learned that the most dangerous moment was when someone with power realized they were losing it. Karen had been suspended, but she was not defeated. She would fight back, perhaps desperately. The storm was not over. It was, in fact, just beginning. But for the first time since moving to Oakwood Estates, I felt the neighborhood might have a chance at real change. And for Emily's sake, I would see this through to the end, no matter what Karen might attempt next. The community center had never been so full. Every seat was taken, with additional residents standing along the walls. The quarterly HOA meeting had been transformed into something more consequential, a referendum on leadership and accountability. In the 2 weeks since Karen's suspension, the atmosphere in Oakwood Estates had changed. Neighbors who had barely spoken now gathered in small groups, sharing stories of their experiences. The external audit of HOA finances had begun, with preliminary findings confirming my suspicions of misappropriation. The police investigation into the assault on Emily was proceeding, with witness statements consistent in their accounts. Karen arrived precisely at 7:00 p.m., flanked by her few remaining allies. She wore a tailored navy suit, projecting an image of professional authority. She took her usual seat at the head table, despite her suspended status, and began arranging papers with practiced precision. Gerald Fisher called the meeting to order. Tonight, we have two main agenda items. First, to address the allegations against Karen Winters regarding both her conduct as HOA president and the incident involving Emily Mitchell. Second, to hold a vote regarding her continued leadership. Karen immediately raised her hand. Before we proceed, I would like to state for the record that this meeting violates proper protocol. My temporary suspension was conducted without due process. The suspension followed the bylaws exactly, Gerald replied firmly, and this meeting was called with proper notice and quorum. He turned to me. Mr. Mitchell has requested time to address the community. I stood and approached the front of the room, carrying a leather portfolio. My security background had taught me that presentation matters, not just the content of information, but how it is dealt. I was dressed in a simple but impeccable suit, my demeanor calm and professional. Thank you for coming tonight, I began. What I am about to present concerns not just my family but every resident of Oakwood Estates. I opened my portfolio and turned to Karen. Mrs. Winters, would you like to revise your statement about what happened at the community barbecue before I proceed? Karen's face hardened. I have nothing to revise. As I have maintained, the girl fell, and I was simply creating distance in a chaotic situation. I nodded as if I had expected this response. Then I will proceed with the facts. The room fell completely silent as I played a video on the large screen, footage from a security camera at the community center that had captured the entire incident. The clarity was unmistakable, Karen deliberately kicking my daughter as she lay on the ground. Gasps filled the room. One woman covered her mouth in horror. Karen's face drained of color as she watched her own actions, irrefutably documented. This footage has been provided to the police, I stated calmly. But the assault on my daughter, as horrific as it was, represents only one aspect of a larger pattern of abuse. I proceeded to present a comprehensive dossier of Karen's tenure as HOA president. Testimonies from elderly residents forced to move after harassment over medical equipment, young families intimidated over children's toys, minority homeowners targeted with selective enforcement of regulations. Mrs. Lombardi, who could not be here tonight because she now lives in assisted living, was fined repeatedly for her wheelchair ramp until she was forced to sell her home of 30 years, I explained, showing photographs and documentation. The Johnsons received daily violations for their son's adaptive play equipment. The Patels were cited for cultural decorations during Diwali. With each example, I provided meticulous documentation, dates, copies of violations, photographs, and witness statements. The presentation was not emotional but factual, delivered with the same precision I would use in a national security briefing. Regarding financial improprieties, I continued, the external audit has confirmed that over $137,000 of community funds were misappropriated over the past 3 years. I displayed financial records, highlighting specific transactions. These funds were used for personal travel, clothing purchases, and home renovations at Mrs. Winters' property. When I finished my presentation, the silence in the room was absolute. Every eye turned to Karen, who sat rigid with fury and dawning fear, the realization that she faced not just an angry parent, but a professional trained to dismantle threats systematically. Officer Daniels stepped forward from the back of the room. Karen Winters, I am here to formally notify you that charges of assault against a minor and embezzlement are being filed. You are not under arrest at this time, but you will be receiving a summons to appear in court. A collective release of tension rippled through the room. Years of intimidation were ending not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet, implacable operation of justice. I move that we vote immediately on the permanent removal of Karen Winters as HOA president, Gerald Fisher announced. The vote was nearly unanimous, hands raised in silent rebuke to years of intimidation and abuse of power. Only Karen and 2 of her closest allies abstained. You will regret this, Karen said as she gathered her belongings. All of you, her eyes found mine, burning with hatred. As she was escorted out, Emily wheeled herself forward from where she had been sitting quietly at the back with Mrs. Thompson. Her presence drew supportive smiles from many residents. "I do not want anyone to feel bad for not speaking up sooner," Emily said, her young voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. "Sometimes it is hard to be the first person to say something is wrong, but it is never too late to help make things right." Community members approached her, some with tears in their eyes, offering apologies for not intervening sooner, for enabling through silence. This moment was not about celebration but restoration, a community finding its voice and its moral compass again. Justice had arrived not as vengeance but as accountability. The system I had sworn to protect in my professional life had worked here, on this smaller but no less important scale. Karen would face legal consequences for her actions, and the community could begin to heal. As Emily and I headed home that evening, she looked up at me with a small smile. "We did it, Dad." "You did most of it, sweetheart," I replied. "Your courage inspired everyone." Spring arrived in Oakwood Estates with more than just blooming flowers and warmer temperatures. The physical landscape of the neighborhood was changing. Ramps appeared at the community center and pool, wider pathways wound through the common gardens, and adaptive playground equipment was installed in the park. The transformation extended beyond these visible changes. Neighbors greeted Emily not with the awkward pity of before, but with genuine inclusion. Children invited her to birthdays and study groups. Adults sought her input on making community events more accessible for everyone. The legal proceedings against Karen Winters concluded with a plea agreement. She received probation for the assault, mandatory community service hours, specifically with disability organizations, and was ordered to make full restitution for the misappropriated HOA funds. More importantly, she moved away from Oakwood Estates, selling her home to a young couple with a son who used hearing aids. The new HOA board, led by Gerald Fisher with Mrs. Thompson as vice president, implemented comprehensive reforms. Architectural review processes now explicitly prioritized accessibility. Financial records were made transparent and available to all homeowners. Monthly meetings included an open forum where residents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. One warm evening, as neighborhood children played an inclusive game of modified basketball that accommodated Emily's wheelchair, I sat on